says hi. So the app doesn't tell us who says hi.
Wow, it's a little surprise. Oh, Mr. Guest Dan.
It's a surprise, but I'll put it. I have it on my phone so we can see.
Put the flowers
Adam is on. Cool.
randomly.
Yeah, that's right.
Welcome, Adam. Let me get the ticker going on here. Talking with CDSF about squats.
Okay, looking forward. Nice.
This is pretty cool, right?
Yeah.
One of these days, throw sports scores on there, Pat.
Yeah, all right. That would be awesome if we had some sports scores to report. I think they started Korean baseball started. Dan, I'm sure you know.
They have.
Yeah. All right. If you can't hear us, just let us know. Throw us a comment. Just let us know that you can't hear us. So today we're talking with Mike and Dan from Capital District Sport and Fitness. You guys are located up in Malta, I guess, right?
Yeah, Round Lake, Clifton Park area.
All right. So Mike, actually, why don't you tell us a little bit about you first?
Yeah, definitely, Pat. Yeah, thanks for having us on.
Yeah.
Guys, my name's Mike Serrani. I'm co-owner of Capital District Sport and Fitness, along with Dan Jones. Grew up in this area, a small town called Chatham, little south of Albany. Went to college at Springfield College, studied exercise science and played baseball there, which is where I met Dan. And then moved out to Boston right after that. Went to massage therapy school, did a couple internships, and worked there for around 7 years before coming back to.
Hold on a second, because you gloss over an internship that you did.
Yeah.
So can you just go? You don't have to go into a lot of detail, but who did you do the internship with? And
with Eric Cressy at his Boston facility. This was before he had the Florida facility as well. So yeah, learned a lot there, and
yeah.
had a good time.
So learning from one of the best.
One of the best, man.
Yes, sir.
Good guy.
So all right, I didn't want to go back. So did those internships and then massage school, and then what?
Massage school and worked out there as a personal trainer and massage therapist for around 7 years before linking up with Dan again and moving back here in what seems like was just yesterday, but was the winter of 2018 to put together CDSF with Dan.
Nice. And Dan, how about you? Give us a little bit of background on you.
Yeah, quick background on me. I'm originally from Mechanicville. Again, I went to Springfield with Mike, where we met playing baseball there. I studied sports biology for my undergrad, played baseball for 4 years, decided to stick around, and I was a grad assistant coach there for 2 years while I was studying exercise, getting my master's in exercise science with a concentration in sport and exercise psychology. So I did that for 2 years. So I was in Massachusetts for 6 years, not as long as Mike was in Massachusetts. So I moved back to New York in 2014, where I started training locally in Clifton Park, and I was doing that, and I was also running some speed and agility classes at a baseball facility in Colony as well. I'm still pretty heavily involved in baseball in the area. My favorite sport, so why not get a chance to be involved with that? And I've been doing that. And then, Mike approached me when he was coming back to the area, said, hey, I'm looking to do X, Y, Z. And he asked me if I would be interested. And it was kind of a no-brainer to get a chance to do something, exciting with Mike. So, almost 2 years later, and here we are.
That's awesome. And so real quick, both of you guys have a pretty strong foundation in baseball as well. So, you talked a little bit about that from my experience with you. I know you guys work a lot with baseball athletes from all kinds of levels. So that's pretty cool. And both of you guys played and everything like that. So, all right, we're going to get into it. So today we wanted to talk about squatting. So a thing that myself, Mike, and Dan have done in the past, and we'll probably pick up a little bit in the future once, we can all hang out together again, is we did a few of these episodes called PT to the Gym. So what we were doing was talking about, if you're someone who was injured or something happened and you needed physical therapy, how do you transition from physical therapy back to the gym? And for me as a PT, I'm a big believer in, not stopping what you're doing and trying to get you back to your gym, your coach, or whoever it is, to get you back to the level that you were at before. So we wanted to talk a little bit about that today, and specifically with squatting, right? So I know you guys do a lot in the way of progressing people back to squatting. So why don't you talk a little bit about that, and then we'll get into our assessments and our checklists and all that kind of stuff.
No, definitely. So in our business model here, we train primarily with a semi-private model. So our athletes and our adults will come in, and then based on their assessment, they're going to train in a small group with their own program. So a big piece for us in terms of keeping things flowing, I guess, as smoothly as possible, along with keeping people healthy and progressing, is kind of figuring out where they're coming from and where their starting points are to help us be able to choose better exercises and write a better program. So when it comes, to the squat, like any other lift, we want to figure out what their history is with squatting, what their injury history may be, what their range of motion is, what their bigger movements like. So we can figure out, okay, if a squat is in this person's program, what's that squat going to look like? So we may have 5 people in the gym, 3 squatting, but all their squats look a little bit different. So that's really our first kind of landmark, or first point we start at is what is that squat going to be for that individual.
Good, cool. Yeah, and I think we'll throw them up here in a second. We're gonna kind of look at the difference in how I would go about my squat checklist and what your assessment is when you're trying to put someone into this kind of semi-private model to keep things moving. And I like that because it gives the person a little bit of ownership over what they're doing, but also it keeps them moving. So, all right. So real quick, for me, I'm going to throw up my checklist here real quick, guys, if you don't mind.
Let's
see if this works. There it is. So if you're part of the group here, this checklist from my standpoint is part of the posts. If you go back in the post, this checklist is up, and we'll just run through it real quick. I think you need about 6 different things: ankle mobility, knee mobility, hip strength, your core, and then this squat balance, which you'll see kind of that strength, core, and squat balance. You'll see that kind of come up in Mike and Dan's assessments there as well. And so if you run through the checklist, it's really a handful of different movements that we want to try and do that are a little bit more nitty gritty from the PT standpoint in terms of like joint mobility, specific joints, ability to maintain neutral spine. So these are a little bit smaller movements. Again, if you want the checklist, it's in. You can either comment on this or ask for it here, but it is in the posts if you go back. And then figuring out and understanding that checklist here is really going to inform what Mike and Dan have. So, I don't want to spend too much time on this because I really want to go through what Mike and Dan have because they're going to demonstrate a little bit of it as well, right?
Definitely, yeah.
Yeah, so this is going to take it down. That's going to take it down a little bit more nitty gritty. So let me see if I can pull up your guys' assessment here. All right, I think I got it there, right? So look at that handsome fellow.
Please, guys, scroll through that quick, Pat, please. Nobody
doing some squatting. All right. So let's get in, guys. Let's get into a little bit of what you're doing. I'm gonna see if I can take my picture out of it, so it's just you guys. That's me. Let's see if I can put you guys up instead. No. All right. I'll figure it out. Hold on. Don't worry.
Yeah, we can have all of us.
Yeah, we'll have all of us for now. Go ahead.
We can see. All right, cool, Pat. So yeah, we're just gonna scroll through what our bigger global movement assessment is for the squat when somebody comes in. Now, usually prior to this, we would have brought somebody through our table assessment. So looking at more specific joint ranges of motion, more similar, to what Pat would do. So an idea of kind of what we're coming into when we go to look at this bigger squat. And I know people that do it the other way around. It's just kind of what we're more comfortable with. And who knows after we open if that's even going to be a piece, putting hands on something on the table for our assessment. So,
Right.
so yeah, I know it's crazy to think about, guys. Like we talked about that. Like, is that dead? Probably for the time being. So I guess even more value to having a good eye going through this, if that's something that is off the table when we all get back to work. So we're going to go through this global assessment and how we break things down to try to tease out and filter out where some of these limiting factors may be. And as we're going through this and finding these limiting factors, we're starting to pair up, okay, they're probably better suited for this type of squat or that squat in their program. So the first thing we're going to look at is going to be an overhead squat, and it's going to be the most challenging variation, and it's going to tease out potentially the most things as we work down the list. So, Pat, you want me? I'm just bring Dan through this right now.
Yeah, go for it. Yeah, if you guys want to show what you're looking for when you do it.
Yeah, we're going to slide our table out of the way right now. I didn't want to swing it towards the platforms.
So we'll go through these global movements and just talk about like what you're looking for. And I think this is a good way that people at home now can kind of go through these and look at what they should be working on.
Yeah. Pat, talk to us now before we go. Do you have a good view of all of me, all of Dan?
Yeah, we can see you.
Okay, cool. Okay, so the first piece we're going to look at is an overhead squat. So for this, what we're trying to tease out kind of first is, do they have any shoulder joints? So shoulder flexion, mobility restrictions, or do they have any potential thoracic spine restrictions that is going to influence their squat or influence other joints down the chain? So Dan, why don't you turn and face away right here? Can you see Dan okay right now, Pat?
Yep.
Okay, so we'll give some cueing, but very minimal cueing while we're going through this. I'll say again, let's set up with your feet about shoulder width, wherever you're most comfortable. Let's bring your hands up overhead. I want you to maintain the hands overhead. And then right here, guys, I'm already screening. When I tell somebody hands overhead, I'm putting the squat aside really quick, and I'm looking at what their shoulder flexion is, what their lower back does, what their humerus and wrist position is here, just to note if it matches up with other things I've seen in my assessment. And then we're going to go through our squats. So say, hey, give me 3 squats right here, Dan. However you want, I'm going to take a look. And I won't say much during this, and just kind of observe. And then you can let your arms go down and relax. So Dan is a little bit more in the hypermobile end and moves well, and like those look really good. But let's say somebody was restricted in their shoulder flexion, or maybe their thoracic extension. Here's what a squat may look like. So I'll tell Dan to go arms overhead. And already you may see they only get to like maybe nose or ear height, or a little bit in between nose and ear. Maybe they start to arch. So I start to see that restriction already. Let's come back lower. Then I'll say, okay, Dan, just down. I say, okay, go through 3 squats right now. And Dan will go through it. You may see this forward folding. The hands start to drop lower to the floor. The butt starts to shoot back instead of truly pulling down. So right now, I just know Dan probably has a shoulder flexion limitation. But I still don't know what's going on at his ankle, what's going on at his hips, or truly what's going on at his thoracic spine. So you have that sheet up right now, Pat?
Yep, there you go.
Okay, so after that, and you'll see, I think on the bottom, Pat, I wrote, limiting factors we're looking at. Here, it could be the shoulders, it could be the T-spine, it could be the core, hips, or ankles. It could be a lot of things. I've just teased out, let's say, Dan's shoulder. So the next one we're going to look at is going to be more specific. So now we're going to take the shoulder joint out of the equation. So now we're going to look at thoracic spine, hips, knees, core, and ankle. So to take the shoulders out of the equation, we're going to say, let's just take your hands, put them behind your head. Now we're going to do the same 3 squats right here. So Dan's always going to look clean with his squats. But let's say Dan was truly that person who folded over a ton when the hands were overhead. I just said, Dan, hands behind your head now, do your squats, and they looked like they just did. So they cleaned up significantly. So then we know like a lot of their dysfunction is probably happening at the shoulder joint and the thoracic spine, because we took those joints out of the equation and it cleaned up significantly. But let's say it still didn't, or we want to look a little bit more down the chain. Yeah, Pat, you want to slide it down a little bit more again? Thank you, sir. Okay. So now we're going to be even more specific. We're going to look at your core, stability. We're going to look at your hips. We're going to look at your ankles. So I'm going to pop out of the screen really quick. Or actually, I can grab a kettlebell. Okay. So this is the biggest one to tease out for us. If somebody has more prominent motor control and like anterior core stability issue, there's any mobility issue in the hips or maybe the thoracic spine. So now instead of hands behind your head, we're going to grab a counterweight, depending on the client we have, anywhere from like 5 to 15 pounds. We're going to have them hold that weight, whether it's a kettlebell or a dumbbell or a plate. And now as you're squatting, you're going to press that plate out as you're lowering down. And usually, guys, here, if somebody has the mobility in their hips, then I want to hit a couple more. If somebody has the mobility in their hips, this is going to clean it up a ton. If it is really more of a core stability issue and not a hip mobility issue, you're going to see that depth improve pretty drastically unless we go to this last one, unless somebody truly has tight ankles and a dorsiflexion restriction. So let's say I gave Dan that counterweight and his squat still did not look awesome to me. And Dan's going to grab some plates. We'll get some mats here. And we're going to elevate the heels a little bit to remove how much dorsiflexion you need to go through in your squat. Yeah, I'm going to get you. How do you have right there, Dan? 4.
Welcome in, Darren.
And then we're going to keep the counterbalance involved. So, Dan, do one without the max leverage. Step forward and grab the counterweight. Let's say he still did this and didn't look awesome. So pull forward and go really bad. Let's say it still kind of didn't look like we really wanted it to. Let's say, okay, let's elevate the heels. Let's toe out a little bit too. That'll give that ankle joint a little bit more room to move. And now let's press out and squat down. And usually here, if the ankles are a big player, or even just a little bit with most people, you're going to see that depth and that upright position improve a ton. So for us, just working through that checklist of movements, we're going from the overhead, where there's a lot of different variables, down to where we're elevating the heels, where we're really just looking at a couple things. For us to start to tease out what those biggest limiting factors are, Pat.
Yeah, so that's great. And then we'll get into the kind of that next sheet that you had there, which is choosing the best variation. So my question to you is going to be, all right, after you take them through that assessment, right?
Yep.
You take them through those global movements. What are you like? Let's say in that last movement you have counterweight with a heel lift.
Yep.
Is that how you'll have them squat in the gym, or will you choose a variation of squat differently? So that was going to be my question to you before we got into that next flow sheet that you guys have, which I think is great.
Yeah. So your question is, Pat, just to rephrase, make sure we're on the same page. Based on what we're seeing there, is that driving our variation right away, or will we train them like specific to a screen?
Either or. Will you train specific to the screen at the same time try to improve those? Will you pick a squat variation to start off right off the bat, right off what assessment you get, or will you hold off on squatting until they can improve some things? Kind of what's your take?
I think injury history plays the biggest into that. So let's just pretend somebody has no history of like low back pain, low back injury, hip injury. Then we want them to squat. Like we want to train them in that squat. So then, yes, like what we see in the screen is going to drive it. We have people in phase 1, 2, 3, 4 have always trained with a heel lift.
Yeah.
People who have started with a heel lift, we're really working on ankle mobility, and it's improved to the point where they don't need it anymore. Mm-hmm. So yeah, we're not afraid to have in their program goblet squat with a pulse. That's their squat variation, just like or heels elevated. So
and that's what I like, because it keeps people squatting, or it's moving them in the direction of fully squatting instead of just saying, well, you can't actually get there, so we're going to hold off on it until until we try a bunch of other things before we can get there.
Yeah, I think that's something we've all been through, or maybe you're there right now in your career, or somewhere along the lines of like, this movement needs to be perfect. If not, we can't train it. Or if you don't meet prerequisite A through D, you can't do this. I mean, you'll see there are variations we're going to go through shortly that most people can train way harder than they think, or you may think. It really comes down to, Pat, I mean, we do this all the time with all the clients we share. What's the exercise selection and the dosage you're going to give them, and then get to work.
Right. So let's go. Yeah, let's go through this variation that you have here because I really like it. I really like kind of the setup that you guys have for exactly what you just said. Like based on your assessments, there's differing levels of squats, and now yeah, it'll change where the weight is a little bit, but wouldn't you rather squat than not squat? So let's go ahead and why don't you talk me through kind of this variation sheet that you guys have?
Yeah, so here are, I would say this makes up probably 95% of the squat variations that we'll have our members do in the gym. And all this, I mean, each person is going to start at a different level on a different squat. But Pat, if you scroll down a little bit more, our, let's say, baseline squat variation is the goblet squat. If we have somebody that comes in that is very untrained, we're going to ideally start them with the goblet squat. And then if we were going through just like a textbook progression, which rarely happens, you're going to go from the goblet squat in terms of progressively loading and increasing the difficulty, a goblet squat, a 2-arm front-loaded kettlebell squat, a barbell front squat, and then a back squat. But things come up. Some people have past injury histories, have movement that is not ideal, play sports with competing demands. So that's where those horizontal arrows come in. And sometimes we either have to stay somewhere lower on the chain, so below a back squat, or sometimes we got to reroute and kick over to the side to one of those other variations.
Yeah.
And I think, Pat, too, it's important for our clients and people that we're working with to understand that just because you went through a 4-week program with the goblet squat doesn't automatically mean you're moving up to a 2-arm kettlebell squat. Often here, when we try and have our athletes or our adults, max out the rack in a goblet hold before we progress to something a little more on the heavier side, or in terms of like stability. If we're going to get to the two-arm kettlebell, we want them to feel stable in that goblet position. And that's when we would, we're going to add in those constraints that we talked about earlier, whether it's a heel lift, sometimes it's a mini band, things like that, to make sure that we can get them into those good positions, with the weight that they can handle before we start moving them to those different progressions for our squats.
Yeah, and it may seem crazy maxing out the rack, but I don't know how many times then we've had to hand an 80-pound dumbbell, to a high school sophomore field hockey player,
Yeah, to be able to squat and I like, Dan, kind of that you brought that up because I was gonna mention it. Those constraints too. To me, that would be more, if you found someone that had some mobility issues, ankle or hip or knee or whatever, you can have them squatting a decent amount of weight with goblets and kettlebells and even front squats and still take them to a box and still put them in a heel lift. I mean, from my standpoint, a lot of people don't like doing box squats. And when I tell them, from a research standpoint, you're still activating quads, glutes, you're still hitting those muscles. You're just not going as deep. And right now, going as deep might not be the best thing for you, but would you rather not squat at all or hit that box and still be working, and working towards that goal of back squatting heavy or safety bar squatting heavy or anything like that?
Yeah, do you see, Pat, a stubbornness with people? If I'm not back squatting, I'm not squatting.
Oh, yeah. I do. I mean, you guys know I deal a lot with CrossFitters, and that's a huge piece of it. So.
I mean, but some of that is the nature of the sport, right? I'm not familiar, but I'm sure you need to squat in certain events or.
Right, but you definitely deal with that stubbornness in there. I wanted to talk a little bit because I know you guys use it a lot, and I wanted to ask if this has more to do with kind of your population being overhead athletes, most of them, or just from a safety perspective. I know you guys use the safety bar a lot. Mm-hmm. Is that because, from a mobility standpoint, is that because overhead athletes and you're not putting them in that externally rotated position aggressively, or what? Why do you guys tend to use that a lot?
Yeah, I mean that's the biggest driver, Pat, is with our primarily baseball athletes, but we have lacrosse players, volleyball athletes, basketball players as well. Softball players all need to be, healthy with the shoulder and strong overhead. So yeah, not putting them into, think about when you throw, guys. If you were to throw a baseball, you have this kind of max like torque and stress as you're coming into abduction, flexion, and external rotation. And now think about a back squat, 200, 300, whatever pounds, flexion, abduction, external rotation. So the tissues you're stressing are all the same. So if somebody's going out there and making, 200 throws a week, I don't want to load up those same tissues. It's that same area.
Yeah, I 100% agree. I mean, I love, I get people who will have shoulder surgery or labral surgery or something like that. And they're like, oh, I'm not going to be able to squat for forever because I can't do anything and blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, well, we can use a safety bar. And it like blows their mind that they can then, just load up and squat and just keep their hands in front to do that. But yeah, it's to me, why stress the front side of that shoulder, like you said, with your overhead athletes? Why stress the front side of that shoulder if we don't need to? Same thing with some of these other athletes.
Yeah, Pat, I think it's almost like the other side of the spectrum in terms of the population. If you have somebody that works at a desk all day and is more kyphotic and rounded, the safety bar could be, if that's somebody who wants to back squat and is healthy too, it can be better suited for them too. I mean, just think like your Dan versus me. Dan's thoracic spine, you can probably stand here, Dan. Stand back a little bit. Look at Dan's thoracic spine, which is way flatter. You can see I could just like draw the straight line down here. I think a barbell is going to sit way better on that flatter spine than it is somebody who is more rounded. Like
right.
Put a bar on somebody more kyphotic, and they have to get their shoulders back where they probably don't have that range to do so. Now you're going to probably see compensation in the low back down the chain. Well, if we put that safety bar on them, we don't have to worry about getting that thoracic extension and the shoulder external rotation. Now they can probably squat, and we are taking significant stress off that low back, even though it is still, axial loaded.
Yeah, that's a great point. Actually, I wasn't even thinking on that way. You're trying to get them to do the squat, trying to load them, but where are they comfortable doing it for now? Now while you're working on that thoracic extension, while you're working on that shoulder mobility, all that kind of stuff, and even if not, like if they have a flatter thoracic spine, it might just be better for them to safety squat anyway. So I think that's a point that isn't made enough. That safety bar can be a good tool to use for different structures, different body types, and different types of athletes.
Definitely.
Cool. All right, so I really like this. If you would mind, do you have this on your website or something?
I will, guys, get a link posted up. I'll get the link posted up tonight, Pat.
Yeah, if you get a link posted up to this, send it to me, and then what I'll do is I'll post it in the group so people can go grab it from your website.
Perfect. Yeah.
Because I think this is a really cool progression, and then you just have to understand, guys, it starts from the bottom and works its way up.
Yeah, I may have did that wrong. I'm sorry, everyone.
You start. It's fine.
That's it. Yeah, I know what I'm doing.
You're working to get to the top of the page.
You want to start up here with safety and back squat, and if not, then you drop down. If not, then you drop down. If not, then you drop down. And I think it's good because a lot of people, a lot of clients and athletes and stuff are smart. They know they have, weaknesses in certain spots and mobility issues in other spots. So I think it's good to have kind of this. I really like this progression you guys have here.
Nice.
And then moving on, like, you and we've talked about all this stuff. And this kind of here, Dan, if you don't mind, I'm going to take your picture out of here.
You can look at my
this kind of mobility stuff you've got going on here. This gets into both kind of my checklist as well as kind of your global movement, and just gives people, I think, an idea of, what they should think about in different areas. Some exercises they might be able to use. Why don't go kind of what's this part of the improving mobility? Are you here to give some people ideas to kind of understand where they're losing mobility?
Yeah, so here are, and this is like nowhere near the be all end all of our mobility exercises or what you should do or what's best for you, but it's just a sample breakout of, okay, let's say in our screen, you lacked ankle dorsiflexion that really impacted your squat and is probably or definitely impacting other activities that you are trying to do. And let's say that you also lack some hip rotation. So your warm up, or maybe exercises that are supersetted with your bigger lift, are more directed at your ankles and your hips to improve those variables, while we're still training your squat above, let's say a front squat with a heel lift. Here's just what we're going after to try to improve those limited areas.
And I think, Mike, too, I think it's a common misconception that people who have difficulty squatting, or might have pain that only occurs with squatting, is that there's only, people think, oh, it's just the hips I have to work on mobility, or it's just the ankles. I don't think people often take into account all the other things that go into a squat, whether it's your core, your shoulders, where your scaps are positioned, like Mike talked about, flatter T-spine versus more rounded. So I think people often forget about those things when it comes to either warming up for the squat or training, mobility to be able to squat.
I would 100% agree. How many times I've had someone come in and squat and they do kind of your fault that you did it before, where they fold forward. Mm-hmm. And I go through a couple things and I tell them, okay, we're going to work on getting your ankles looser. And they're like, wait, what? Right. My upper body's folding forward and my hands are like about to touch the floor. What do you mean you want to work on my ankles? And it's to that point, like you gotta look at the whole picture. The way the ankles affect the shin bone, which affects the knee, which affects the hips, which affects the back, which affects the shoulders. Like that whole sequence. So I think you hit it. I think you hit it perfect when you kind of mentioned that. When you're working on a squat, you want to tease out where your issue is, but you want to work on each piece to keep that squat nice and healthy and smooth.
And Pat, I think something that we didn't even mention before that can apply here and also applies back to like things we're looking at our assessment is like, Mike talked about how I have a flatter T-spine than maybe he does, but a couple other things that are going to come into play are the fact that I'm 6'3", right? My limbs are going to be different lengths. My ankles are going to be a little bit more mobile than Mike. So, the mobility plays a part, but also, just overall structure and anatomy are going to be a big factor in terms of your ability to squat, your squat depth, whether it's anteverted or retroverted hips. Mm-hmm. My femurs are going to be a little bit longer than Mike's, more than likely if I were to get out a measuring tape and measure them, and that's going to affect my shin angle on my squat. So, all those factors are going to play into the stuff that we're looking at in the assessment and the stuff that we decide is going to be important for somebody when it comes to working on that mobility as well.
Yeah, I would agree. It's that global movement and what you're talking about in terms of anatomy and hip sockets and all that. It's incredible how many people have been told, you just have to squat with your feet in parallel underneath your shoulders. And if that were the case, everybody's hips and everybody's femurs and everybody's tibias would all be the same length. And so from the anatomy standpoint, everybody's going to be a little bit different. So some people are going to be turned out, some people are going to be wider. And I think, in your global assessment, you guys kind of go through that and make sure people are in the right spot from the anatomy standpoint, which you brought up, which is cool. So last part, I'll just throw up the last one because Dan's doing a big squat here.
Oh yeah.
Oh, am I?
I don't know what you're doing there, but that's a safety bar. If anyone has never seen one, so he's back squatting. The weight is behind him. But he's holding on to the handles in front, and that's because Dan is a baseball pitcher. He wants to protect his shoulder as long as he can. He wants to be throwing 90-mile-an-hour fastballs until he's 60.
That's the plan.
All right, and then with this, you just have some good cues, locking in, keeping that tension, pulling yourself down, and then pushing the heels through the floor to stand back up. So, real quick, you said you could put this up on the site, right?
Oh, definitely, Pat. I'll send the link over tonight, and then if you want to toss it up on the
I'll put it up in the group. Yeah, I'll put the link up in the group so that people can have these variations. And I think these variations apply anywhere. It doesn't matter if you're in private one-on-one training, semi-private, CrossFit, metabolic, orange, whatever it is. I think, like I said, I think this is the cool part here is that this is a great progression to keep you squatting, even though you might have some mobility issues or something like that, that you can work on those mobility issues or strength issues at the same time as doing one of these variations. Cool. All right, so where can people find you online, social, like all that kind of stuff? What's your social?
Yeah, guys, we're everywhere.
Your social security number, like your social.
No, only Dan.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's just for Dan and I, guys. I'm sorry. No, so guys, on Instagram at Capital District Sport and Fitness, Facebook the same, Capital District Sport and Fitness. Twitter, it's like shorter, but just search Capital District Sport and Fitness. We're there.
CDF Sport Fit.
Yeah, guys, website we're there. Obviously, closed for the moment. But
and you guys are located right off exit 10, off of 87.
Right off exit 10, 87, yes, sir.
And I'm not gonna lie, if you listen to this, if you've got a baseball player, these are the guys they should be going to. Not gonna lie.
No.
So awesome, guys. I appreciate you coming on.
Thank you, sir.
I appreciate you talking through the squatting and all that good stuff. And hopefully we'll be able to get into the gym soon, right?
I hope so. So nice out today.
Crossing my fingers.
Good day for people to be in here. But no, everybody, stay safe, stay healthy. Don't drink too many Trulies.
Yeah. Trulies, White Claws, all that good stuff.
Yeah, don't judge me for drinking Trulies.
It's not when it's warm outside. That's what I'm gonna have.
Thank you.
Zero
Thank
cal?
you.
Yeah, I think it's 0 cal.
I'll take 100 cows
There you go.
for how much fun I have. Yeah, okay.
And if you are watching this on the recording, if you have any questions for these guys, just post them in the comments, and we'll make sure that it gets to them and they can answer them. All right.
Definitely, Pat.
All right. Appreciate it. Thanks, everybody.
Yes,
Pat,
sir.
thanks for having us.
Yep. Absolutely. Take it easy.
Peace, guys.